In 1859 Wyoming Territory, a lonely cowboy named Josiah witnesses a paralyzed woman named Catherine being brutally beaten by her caretaker, and makes an impulsive decision that will change both their lives forever. When two broken souls discover that true worth isn't measured by what society says you're lacking, but by the courage to rebuild your life alongside someone who truly sees you, what happens when the past comes hunting for what it believes it owns? Dust swirled through the empty streets like ghosts searching for the living. Josiah Brennan rode his brown horse through Cedar Ridge, Wyoming Territory, on a cold November day in 1859. The town looked half dead since the silver mine closed down last spring. His stomach growled louder than thunder. 3 days without a proper meal made even hardtack sound good right now. The general store sat boarded up tight, but maybe the boarding house still served food to travelers with coin in their pockets. Josiah's horse snorted and shook her head, ears twitching toward a sound that didn't belong. A woman's cry cut through the afternoon air like a knife through butter, not the usual holler of children playing or wives calling husbands home for supper. This sound carried pain that made his chest feel tight. He'd heard plenty of domestic troubles in his 32 years. Smart men kept riding when family business got loud. But something about this particular cry made his hands pull tight on the leather reins without his brain giving the order. Through the dirty window of Murphy's boarding house, movement caught his eye. A big man with graying whiskers raised his meaty fist high above his head. Below him sat a woman with auburn hair, trapped in some kind of chair with wooden wheels. She couldn't run, couldn't dodge, could only sit there and take whatever came next. Josiah had seen enough cruelty for 10 lifetimes, lost his sister Mary to pneumonia 3 winters back, watched his ranch burn to ash 2 summers ago, buried his parents before his 20th birthday. Each loss taught him the same hard lesson. Caring about other people only brought heartache, but Mary's voice whispered in his memory like wind through dry grass. Promise me something, Josiah. Promise you'll remember that broken don't mean worthless. The woman in the chair lifted her head, and even through glass and grime, he could see green eyes that held more strength than fear. She wasn't begging or crying, just waiting with the patience of someone who'd learned that fighting back only made things worse. The big man's fist came down fast and hard. Josiah's boots hit the ground before his horse stopped moving. "You clumsy fool!" Vernon Cates roared like an angry bear inside the boarding house parlor. "Can't even pour coffee without spilling it everywhere." Catherine Mills pressed a torn rag against her bleeding lip, tasting copper and shame. The coffee cup lay in pieces on the wooden floor, brown liquid spreading toward the fireplace like a guilty secret trying to hide. Her hands shook so bad she could barely hold the cloth steady. "I'm sorry, Vernon. The cup slipped when you moved your arm. I didn't mean." "Didn't mean?" His voice got louder and meaner. "That's all I ever hear from you. Didn't mean to drop the dishes. Didn't mean to slow down the washing. Didn't mean to be such a burden on decent folks." Through the window, Catherine watched a stranger tie his horse to the hitching post. Tall man wearing a brown hat, moving with the careful grace of someone who'd learned to watch for trouble. Most travelers avoided Cedar Ridge these days. Too little money, too much desperation floating around like bad air. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." Vernon grabbed her chin with thick fingers, forcing her head up. "Your own family dumped you here because they couldn't stand looking at your useless legs anymore. Should have left you to freeze that first winter, instead of taking pity." The words hurt worse than his fists ever could. Catherine closed her eyes and tried to remember a time when people looked at her like she mattered. Before the accident with the runaway wagon. Before the fever that followed. Before her legs stopped working and her family decided she'd become too much trouble to keep around. "Please," she whispered, "I'll clean up the coffee. I'll be more careful next time." "Next time?" Vernon laughed, but no humor lived in the sound. "Woman who can't walk ain't got no business trying to serve anybody anything. You're nothing but dead weight around here." Heavy boots stomped across the front porch outside. Catherine's heart jumped like a rabbit, sensing danger. Vernon never got visitors this late in the day. Most folks in town crossed the street rather than deal with his drunk anger and loud mouth. The door exploded inward with a crash that shook dust from the ceiling beams. A stranger filled the doorway, hat casting shadows over his face. But Catherine could see his eyes clearly enough, dark as winter night, and burning with something that looked dangerously close to justice. The boarding house door exploded inward like thunder on a clear day. Josiah stepped through the broken wood, his boots crunching on splinters, as Vernon spun around with wild eyes. "Step away from her." The cowboy's voice cut through the room like a knife through butter. Vernon's face turned red as a tomato. "This ain't your business, stranger. Woman belongs to me." "Belongs?" Josiah's hand moved to his gun belt, fingers dancing near the handle. "Last I checked, people don't belong to nobody." Catherine sat frozen in her wooden chair, her green eyes wide with shock. Blood trickled from her split lip, but something else flickered in her gaze, hope, maybe, or just plain surprise that someone had actually stopped. "She owes me money," Vernon snarled, puffing up his chest like an angry rooster. "Been living under my roof, eating my food. Can't just walk away from her debts." "Can't walk away from anything," Vernon added with a cruel laugh, pointing at Catherine's legs. The insult hit Catherine like a slap. She looked down at her hands, shame washing over her face. This stranger would see what everyone else saw, a broken woman, more trouble than she was worth. But Josiah surprised her. "She's coming with me," he said quietly, the words hanging in the air like smoke from a campfire. Vernon blinked twice, then burst out laughing. "You're crazier than a loon. What you gonna do with a busted-up woman? She can't cook, can't clean proper, can't even get herself to the outhouse without help." "I can do plenty," Catherine whispered, her voice barely audible. "What was that?" Vernon cupped his ear, mocking her. "I said I can do plenty." Catherine's voice grew stronger, surprising everyone in the room, including herself. Josiah crouched down beside her chair, bringing his eyes level with hers. "Ma'am, I got a cabin up in the mountains. Nothing fancy, but it's peaceful. You can come if you want, or you can stay here. Your choice." Catherine stared at him. When was the last time anyone had given her a choice about anything? People decided things for her, where she lived, what she ate, when she slept. They talked over her head like she wasn't even there. "I don't have any money," she said. "Don't need any. I can't pay you back. Not asking you to." Vernon stepped forward, his fists clenched. "Now hold on just a minute. You can't just walk in here and steal my property. I got rights. So does she." Josiah stood up slowly, his full height, making Vernon take a step back. The room fell silent except for the tick of an old clock on the mantel. Catherine looked between the two men, her heart pounding like a drum. Part of her wanted to go with this stranger who spoke to her like she mattered. But another part, the part that had been beaten down for years, whispered that she was fooling herself. "Why?" she asked Josiah. "Why would you help me?" He was quiet for a moment, his dark eyes thoughtful. "Because everybody deserves a chance to start over, even if they think they don't." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. When was the last time someone had looked at her and seen possibility instead of problems? The wagon wheels creaked and groaned as they rolled away from Cedar Ridge, each turn taking Catherine farther from the only life she'd known for the past 3 years. Josiah had bought the wagon and horse with money from his coat pocket, moving with the quiet efficiency of a man used to making quick decisions. "You can change your mind," Catherine said for the third time, pulling the borrowed blanket tighter around her shoulders. November wind bit through the thin fabric of her dress. Josiah glanced at her sideways. "You want to go back?" "No." The word came out faster than she'd meant it to. "I mean, I don't want to be trouble." "What kind of trouble you figure you'll be?" Catherine had a whole list ready. She needed help getting in and out of bed. She couldn't reach high shelves or carry heavy things. Sometimes her hands shook when she got nervous. She needed more time to do simple tasks that other people did without thinking. "I'm not like other women," she said finally. "Good thing. Other women never interested me much." The comment caught her off guard. She studied his profile, the strong jaw covered in dark stubble, the way his eyes scanned the trail ahead like he was reading a book. He didn't look like a man who made jokes often. "How do you know Vernon won't follow us?" she asked. "He might, but that's a bridge we'll cross when we come to it." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the wagon climbing steadily into the foothills. Pine trees grew thicker as they gained elevation, their green branches heavy with the promise of snow. "Tell me about this cabin of yours," Catherine said, genuinely curious. "Built it myself 5 years ago. Got a good, stone fireplace, windows facing east to catch the morning sun. His voice grew warmer as he talked. Garden plot out back where I grow vegetables. Root cellar to keep things fresh through winter. Sounds peaceful. It is. Sometimes too peaceful. He paused. Gets lonely up there. Catherine understood lonely. She'd been surrounded by people at the boarding house but felt more alone than she ever had in her life. There was a difference between being by yourself and being lonely, though she'd never been able to explain it to anyone who hadn't felt both. What made you come to town today? She asked. Josiah was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. Needed supplies. But mostly, I reckon I was looking for a reason to believe there was still good in the world. Did you find it? He looked at her then, really looked, and Catherine felt something warm unfurl in her chest. Getting there. The trail grew steeper, and Josiah had to focus on guiding the horse around loose rocks and fallen logs. Catherine watched his hands on the reins steady, sure, gentle with the animal. Everything Vernon wasn't. Can I ask you something? She said. Shoot. Why didn't you just give Vernon money from me? Would have been easier than all this. Josiah pulled the wagon to a stop. In the distance, snow-capped mountains rose like giants against the gray sky. Because you're not for sale. You're a human being with your own mind and your own choices. Money would have just told Vernon he was right about you being property. Catherine felt tears threaten again, but this time they weren't tears of sadness. Nobody had ever explained her worth to her before. She'd always been told what she couldn't do, never what she was. Besides, Josiah added with a small smile, something tells me you're going to surprise both of us with what you can do, given half a chance. As the wagon started moving again, Catherine allowed herself to imagine what that might look like. For the first time in years, the future felt like something other than just more of the same. Snow began falling the moment Catherine stepped inside Josiah's cabin, as if the mountains themselves were tucking a warm blanket around her new life. The wooden floors creaked under her wheeled chair, but it wasn't the angry sound she'd grown used to at Vernon's boarding house. Here, even the floorboards seemed to welcome her. Kitchen's through there, Josiah said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. Bedroom's yours. I'll take the loft. Catherine rolled to the window, watching fat snowflakes dance in the lamplight. I can't take your room. Already moved my things. He lit the fire in the stone fireplace, flames jumping to life like excited children. Besides, room downstairs makes more sense for you. The first week passed like a gentle dream. Catherine woke each morning to the smell of coffee and bacon, sounds of Josiah chopping wood outside. She'd never lived anywhere so quiet, so peaceful. No angry voices, no slamming doors, no fear creeping up her spine every time she heard footsteps. She began small tasks without being asked. Mending a torn shirt, peeling potatoes for dinner. Josiah never thanked her with the desperate gratitude she expected, just nodded like her help was natural and welcome. You don't have to prove anything, he said one evening, finding her struggling to reach a high shelf in the pantry. I want to help. Catherine's cheeks flushed pink. I'm not used to people being kind without wanting something back. Josiah pulled down the jar of honey she'd been reaching for. Kindness ain't supposed to cost anything. That's what makes it kindness. By the second week, Catherine found herself laughing. Actually laughing, for the first time in years. Josiah had been telling her about his horse, who was apparently afraid of butterflies. 1,000-pound animal scared of something smaller than my thumb. She giggled, covering her mouth with her hand. Don't let Thunder hear you making fun. Josiah grinned back. He's sensitive about his reputation. The third week brought deeper conversations. Catherine told him about her family, how they'd dropped her at Vernon's after the fever took her legs, how they'd visited twice in 3 years, always looking uncomfortable, always leaving quickly. Their shame, not yours, Josiah said simply. How do you know that? Because you're sitting here, still fighting, still hoping. That takes strength they don't understand. One morning in the fourth week, Catherine wheeled herself onto the porch to find fresh deer tracks in the snow, leading right up to their steps. Curious little doe, Josiah explained, following her gaze. Comes by most mornings. Thinks she's checking on us. Animals know, Catherine said softly. They can tell when a place is safe. That afternoon, while Josiah was checking his trap lines, Catherine noticed a rider approaching through the trees. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she recognized the heavy shape, the cruel set of the shoulders. Vernon Cates had found them. She wheeled herself quickly inside, hands shaking as she reached for Josiah's rifle above the fireplace. Through the window, she watched Vernon dismount, his breath steaming in the cold air. He wasn't alone. 2 other men flanked him, both carrying guns. Catherine had never held a weapon before, but as Vernon's boots crunched through the snow toward her sanctuary, she discovered something fierce and protective growing in her chest. For the first time in her life, she had something worth defending. The door rattled under Vernon's heavy fist, but Catherine didn't open it. Instead, she positioned her chair where she could see all the windows, rifle steady in her lap, and waited for Josiah to come home. Thunder's hoofbeats announced Josiah's return just as Vernon's patience ran out. Catherine watched through the window as the 3 men spread out around the cabin like wolves surrounding prey, their movements careful and planned. "Open this door, Catherine." Vernon's voice boomed across the clearing. "You've caused enough trouble. Time to come home." "This is my home now," Catherine called back, surprised by the strength in her own voice. The rifle felt heavy but right in her hands. Josiah appeared at the tree line, taking in the scene with quick, sharp eyes. He dismounted Thunder behind a large pine, using the trees for cover as he moved closer to the cabin. Catherine's heart raced as she realized he was outnumbered, but something in his calm movements told her he'd faced worse odds before. "That you in there, stranger?" Vernon shouted toward the trees. "Come out and we can settle this peaceful like. Already seems pretty settled to me." Josiah's voice drifted from somewhere near the woodshed. Lady made her choice clear. One of Vernon's men, a thin fellow with nervous hands, started moving toward Josiah's voice. Catherine made a decision that would have shocked the frightened woman she'd been just weeks ago. She opened the window and called out, "Billy Henderson, isn't it? From the general store?" The thin man froze, looking embarrassed to be recognized. "Your mama raised you better than this," Catherine continued. "What would she say about you helping Vernon drag a woman away from her home?" Billy's face reddened. "It ain't personal, Miss Catherine, just business." "Everything's personal when it comes to treating people right or wrong." Vernon snarled at his companion. "Quit talking to her and do what you're paid for." But Billy was already backing away, shaking his head. "I signed on to collect a debt, not kidnap a woman. Count me out, Vernon." The sound of Billy's horse riding away echoed through the clearing. Vernon cursed, but his remaining helper looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Smart man," Josiah said, stepping into view with his rifle ready. Maybe his friend ought to follow his example. The second man looked between Vernon and Josiah, weighing his options. $5 ain't worth dying for," he muttered, and walked toward his horse. "You yellow-bellied cowards!" Vernon screamed after them. "She belongs to me." "Nobody belongs to nobody," Catherine said through the open window. "I learned that living here. Took me 23 years to figure it out, but I finally did." Vernon's face twisted with rage. "You owe me money, girl. 3 years of room and board don't come free." "Room and board?" Catherine's laugh held no humor. "You mean that moldy corner where you kept me? The scraps you threw at me like I was a dog? The beatings every time I couldn't move fast enough? I fed you. Kept a roof over your head when your own family wouldn't. You kept me prisoner." Catherine's voice grew stronger with each word. "But I'm not your prisoner anymore." Josiah had moved closer during their exchange, now standing just 20 feet from Vernon. "Time to leave, Kate's." Lady spoken her piece. "This ain't over," Vernon snarled, but he was backing toward his horse. "I'll get the law involved. She signed papers. Any papers saying a person can own another person got torn up about 10 years ago," Josiah replied calmly. "War settled that question." Vernon mounted his horse, face purple with fury. "You think you can hide up here forever? Winter won't last. Come spring, I'll be back with the sheriff." "Sheriff's welcome any time," Catherine called out. "I'll tell him all about your hospitality. Every bruise, every cruel word, every night I went to bed hungry while you got fat off my family's money." Vernon jerked his horse's reins hard enough to make the animal rear. As he rode away, his curses echoing off the mountainsides, Catherine realized her hands had stopped shaking. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid. The morning sun barely touched the mountain peaks when Catherine heard horses coming up the trail fast. She rolled her chair to the window and felt her heart drop like a stone. Vernon sat tall on a black horse, with 2 rough-looking men beside him. All 3 carried rifles across their saddles like they meant business. "Josiah," she called softly. But he was already moving. He'd heard them, too. Vernon's voice boomed across the clearing. "You got something that belongs to me, and I aim to take it back." Josiah stepped onto the porch, his own rifle ready but pointed at the ground. Don't see how that could be. Everything here was given freely. That woman signed papers. She owes me money for room and board. Law says I can collect what's mine. Catherine's hands shook as she remembered those papers. She'd been so desperate for shelter after her family abandoned her. Vernon had made it sound like charity, but the debt just kept growing no matter how hard she worked. Show me these papers then, Josiah said. Vernon laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Don't need to show you nothing. Way I figure it, you stole my property, and stealing's against the law. Her name is Catherine, and she's not property. The words hit Catherine like warm sunlight. No one had ever defended her before. Not when her own family called her a burden. Not when the town doctor said she'd never be useful again. Not when Vernon's fists taught her to stay quiet and grateful. Property don't get to choose, Vernon snarled. And cripples sure don't get to run off with strange men. Something inside Catherine caught fire. She pulled herself to the door, Josiah's spare gun heavy in her lap. I'm not your property, she called out, her voice stronger than she'd ever heard it. I'm a person, and I choose to be here. Vernon's face turned red. You ungrateful. The ladies made her choice clear, Josiah interrupted. Now you can make yours. Ride away peaceful, or we settle this another way. One of Vernon's men shifted his rifle, and everything happened at once. Josiah dove behind a water barrel as the first shot split the morning air. Wood splinters flew everywhere. Catherine rolled her chair back from the door but kept the gun ready. Her heart hammered like a drum, but her hand stayed steady. A second shot cracked from the trees. Vernon's hat flew off his head. Surrender now, or the next one finds flesh. Josiah's voice echoed from behind the cabin, but Vernon wasn't done. Spread out. She can't run and he can't be everywhere. Catherine saw one man creeping toward the back of the cabin. He thought she was helpless, just like everyone always did. When he kicked in the back door, he found himself staring down the barrel of her pistol. I wouldn't take another step, Catherine said quietly. The man froze, his eyes wide with surprise. Drop the rifle, she continued. Slow and easy. The weapon clattered to the floor. From outside, she heard Vernon cursing and more shots being fired. Then suddenly, everything went quiet. It's over, Catherine, Josiah called. You can come out now. She rolled to the front door and saw Vernon sitting on the ground, holding his bleeding arm. His two men had their hands up high. This ain't finished, Vernon spat. I'll be back with the sheriff. Good, Catherine said, rolling onto the porch. I got plenty to tell him about how you treat folks who can't fight back. Vernon's face went pale. For the first time, he looked scared. Spring water trickled down the mountainside like nature's own music as Catherine worked in the garden behind their cabin. 6 months had passed since Vernon's visit, and the sheriff had indeed come calling. But not for the reasons Vernon expected. It turned out other people in Cedar Ridge had stories to tell about Vernon Cates. Stories about stolen money, about threats, about a dozen small cruelties that added up to something much bigger. Vernon was the one who left town in handcuffs, not Catherine. You know what I figured out? Catherine said as Josiah joined her among the growing vegetables. The carrots were coming up nice and straight, and the beans were already climbing their poles. What's that? He settled onto the wooden stool he'd made for these garden talks. All my life, people told me my worth came from what I could do with my legs. When I lost that, I thought I lost everything. She pulled a weed from between the tomato plants. But that was never true. No? My worth comes from the same place yours does. From being human. From choosing kindness when the world is mean. From helping others when I can. From loving someone who sees all of me, not just the broken parts. She reached for his hand, work rough and honest. From finding someone who lets me be myself instead of trying to fix me. Reckon you're right about that, Josiah said, squeezing her fingers gently. A letter had arrived last week with news from town. The boarding house stood empty now, its windows boarded up. Some traveling preacher had bought the building cheap and planned to turn it into a place where people could stay for free when they had nowhere else to go. Catherine had smiled at that news. Maybe some good would come from all those bad years after all. You ever regret it? She asked, as she sometimes did. Taking in a stranger like me? Josiah's weathered face broke into a grin. Only regret I have is thinking you needed saving in the first place. What do you mean? You didn't need me to rescue you, Catherine. You just needed someone to step back and let you rescue yourself. He gestured toward the cabin, the garden, the life they'd built together. Everything we got here, that's not me taking care of you. That's us taking care of each other. A hawk circled overhead, riding the mountain winds with easy grace. Somewhere down in the valley, other people were fighting their own battles with what they thought they were worth. But here, where two damaged hearts had learned they weren't really broken at all, just bent for a while, the morning felt perfect. Catherine picked up her gardening tools and smiled. The beans needed watering, the cabin needed sweeping, and she had letters to write to that new preacher about how to help people without making them feel small. She had work to do, a life to live, and finally, after all these years, she knew she was worth both the work and the life that came with it. The mountains stood silent and strong around them, keeping their secrets and protecting their own.